Hello, beautiful people. I am Oliver Perrin for Semiagog, joined this afternoon for me, whatever time it is, down on the dark continent for him, by Robert Daigen, also known as Marhobane. I'm very, very happy it is so. I know him and Conscious Caracol as well. I've had him on as guest before. We've spoken many times. I also get with him on occasion over on John D's Friday night cocktail hour. Very often the times align despite the great distance between us, and Robert joins us. And the last time we were talking, there was a sort of excellent little topic came up about white minorities and what the future is likely to look like for them. And so I spoke with Robert. He was kind enough to agree to come on. I'm very much looking forward to hearing his thoughts on what sort of lessons South Africa and the circumstances there can teach us in this regard. Very often, talking to Robert in the past, talking with Ernst van Ziel, Conscious Caracol, there are many things that come up in the news that we can carry over in terms of it being a warning or an indicator of possible future pathways for us. But in this case, Robert is going to discuss some general themes and various stuff that has occurred to him along these lines for what sort of lessons we should bear in mind or warnings for the future. Before I allow him to introduce himself, please do follow this channel, Semiagog, as well as A Safer Space. You can do it on Odyssey. You can do it on BitChute. God help you. You can do it on YouTube. Please follow me on Telegram, on Twitter. I'm on Gab as well. I really do hope you will follow on Odyssey. Thank you to the Praetorian Chads who make all this possible by supporting my channel. Thank you all very much indeed. And also go buy my damn books. This is Vinculum, a dystopian story set in the year 2076 in Istanbul. A book thief is pursued by remorseless corporate hitmen and an esoteric sect of assassins. You can find that down below in the links. It's called Vinculum. And a collection of my poems called Cinders from the Bloomery of Youth. You can also find these on Amazon. And you will see a link, the only one that I knew of to use immediately, for Robert's channel on YouTube. Again, down in the description below, please go check his channel out. Consider subscribing. And now that all my opening blather is completed, Mr. Daigen, please introduce yourself for people and who might not have run into you before, and thank you very much for coming on.
Hi, hello. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I would just quietly add to your list of shilling sort of link things is I don't update my YouTube very much. I mean, I've got a nice sort of introductory series of sort of like Adam Curtis style video essays on South African history for anyone who needs a crash course on the last 100 years. But most of my work that I do sort of regularly is actually on my blog, which you can probably affix that somehow if you want. But all of that's linked on my Twitter. So yeah, I'm actually a freelance political consultant, and so Conscious Caracol, who fares much better on the international information superhighway than I do. He's one of the sort of main up and coming representatives of AfriForum, which is the largest civil rights organization in either the Southern Hemisphere or the whole continent of Africa. And I have done a lot of work with them as well. Some of it published, some of it unpublished. Yeah, I mean, I think that's actually a good place to start, because one of the things that happened, I mean, everyone knows apartheid was a thing and then it wasn't. But what sort of missed, even sometimes over here, is that Afrikaners who ruled this country from in a contested sense since about 1910 and very definitively since 1948. They after power was ceded to the ANC in 1994, their self-confidence and organization just basically collapsed. And there was a long period during which they had no real representation anywhere. The main party that represented them during the apartheid years, the National Party, went from almost full minority representation, as in all like 2/3 to 3/4 of every minority group that's colored, Indian, or white, voted for the National Party in the first general election. And then after 2 general elections, they were gone. And they merged with the ANC. So, I mean, the former head of the National Party actually became the Minister for Tourism for the ANC.
Keeping a good face on it. A quick question for you, just so everybody has some sense of what sort of population proportions we're talking about. What percentage of the South African population is white, and out of that, what's the percentage for Brit versus Afrikaner?
Well, amongst the white people, the Anglo versus Afrikaner balance has remained about 60-40. So slightly more in favor of Afrikaners these days, I'd say maybe like, 2/3 to 1/3. But, with Anglos being the minority there. But white people, a lot of people left since the 90s, and a lot more are leaving now. Most people who can afford to are leaving, so especially young people. So, yeah, we had... at one point, maybe about 100, 120 years ago, we were 1/3 of the population. Now we're down to less than 10%. In the province in which I live, we are a bit bigger. We're 15 to 20%, roughly.
So 10% overall, and then certain areas where the local concentration will bring
I would say 8 to 9% is more accurate for the national level. So it's not looking rosy, I can tell you. And
God, yeah,
no, it's hard. It means that in most places in the country you can't get any kind of democratic representation at all. So it's and I mean we have 2 elections. We have local elections and national elections. And at the national elections, you also vote for the provincial representatives. So, I mean, what you get is that, so the Western Cape, this province, is the only one which is not governed by the ANC. And the reasons for that are that the majority ethnic sort of group in this province is colored. Colored is sort of this really hodgepodge sort of catch-all term that includes the descendants of Malaysian slaves, the descendants of the indigenous Khoi and San peoples, mixed race peoples from, partnerships from 100 or odd years ago. They do tend to have some kind of common culture as a result of being grouped together like this for a long time. But there are divisions, and there are no clean divisions within the colored population. Some of them lean more black friendly, some lean more white friendly, some lean more Christian, some lean more Muslim, some lean more Afrikaans, some lean more English. So it can be kind of difficult. And it's only recently that they're sort of starting to find their voice politically, which is we don't know where that's going, because, if you're looking at the like France or whatever, you're used to like groups who've expressed themselves in one way or another over generations, but the colored people have had no representation for something like 100, 120 years. So we don't know where that's going now that it's starting to rise up. We can see some trends, like they really like the death penalty. They're extremely reactionary, but where they lie sort of in terms of economic policy and racial policy is very difficult to determine. So that's, that remains to be seen.
So I guess as a part of the general picture, what we have here is a number of different groups. It's not. I know this now, having spoke to you and Ernst a number of times. But it's a dizzying mixture of groups, and it's entirely impossible to to break it down in any system where you've sort of got two poles or two groups. It's all over the joint.
No, I think it's easy actually. It's like the first easy division is black versus non-black. So black people are about 80% of the population, just shy of 80%. The remainder is divided into colored, white, and Indian. So we had, until recently, it was the largest Indian diaspora in the world. Most of them are in Durban, in the east of the country, the biggest city in the province of KwaZulu-Natal. Yeah, I mean, there's still people there who speak Tamil and things like that. So it's not.
But even among the blacks, you have all kinds of warring factions. No, I saw a recent post that you did about an election in KwaZulu-Natal that suggested that there was going to be friction between the ANC and the Zulus.
The IFP. So no, the thing is, the whole of KwaZulu-Natal is Zulu, but it's split between black nationalism and Zulu nationalism. So it's a philosophical difference, a political difference, not an ethnic one. So, and the IFP is making a big comeback now that the ANC are failing really hard, and the ANC were dominated by the Xhosa people who come from the Eastern Cape for basically their entire existence, and they're the oldest liberation movement on the planet. So they briefly had a Zulu president in Jacob Zuma from 2009 until 2019. So they had 2009 until 2017. The thing with that guy is he ran on this whole campaign of like, I'm a 100% Zulu boy, and this got big support in KZN. He cut IFP's representation in half, and but now he's gone and his whole faction is being purged, and his last ditch attempt was when he was arrested for contempt of court during the whole sort of corruption hearings. While he was being held in a jail cell, he activated the armed wing of the ANC. That was about 2 years ago. And there was a huge national riot. I mean, they shut down like half the country. Very well coordinated,
including a number of roads to ports. Correct.
So there's this corridor that runs from Johannesburg to Durban, and they shut that down. They shut Durban. They shut a lot of small towns down. Johannesburg and Durban were complete standstill. They burned food supply depots, shut down water supply stations. It was complete chaos. And then just ordinary citizens, and including black people. And there's an interesting dimension there that I can go into briefly. But basically, ordinary citizens shut them down, restored order. And look, Johannesburg was less racially divided in this regard than other places. So black, white, colored, Indian sort of neighborhood militia cooperated with each other. And the black neighborhoods actually, they've now turned into a political movement whose main focus is getting rid of foreigners from the rest of Africa. So, yeah, every few years we have pogroms against African immigrants. 2008 was the most deadly one. They burned like several dozen people alive in the streets. It was really crazy.
And so, but it does seem that, just to try to pull out a point here, so to speak. Not that you're not going towards one, but just to sort of mark them as we move along, right? It does seem, though, we've got the primary division between blacks and non-blacks, roughly 20%, 80%.
And then the secondary division I would say is Zulus against everyone else. So,
but even when it's just conflict between competing black groups, this can very often have enormous effects that are suffered by whites and coloreds and Indians as well, even though they're not specifically the target.
Oh no, they started, like, I was watching this stuff as it unfolded, and So they organized. They sent out WhatsApp groups where they alerted people to where the looting opportunities were, and a lot of it was like encouraging people to go after white-owned and Indian-owned businesses in Durban, in particular. And then it got, after a couple of days, it sort of decided they'd looted most of the malls and the stores and everything, and they started going after the neighborhoods. So they tried to start a pogrom against this Indian neighborhood called Phoenix, which is in the north of Durban, and it's almost completely homogenously Indian. And what happened is the Indians came out and gunned down several hundred black people.
Meaning, it was literally gunned them down, shot them.
Yeah, yes, and it was called the Phoenix Massacre. And you got a lot of people who still cry about this till today, but I mean, they were promising to rape and murder people en masse. They didn't get a single Indian. They were absolutely, backed off. And I think it's just remarkable. There's sort of a stable fact about Africa wherever you look, whether it's Rhodesia or back to colonial times. It doesn't matter if you give Africans guns. For some reason, they can't aim with them. And if you look at like sort of battle casualties in Rhodesia, almost every single battle is something like 15-1 kill to death ratio. So
it isn't just those handsome shorts.
No, it's not. But I mean, the Indians are very impressive people in terms of sort of social engineering. There's an Indian businessman who managed to get himself in charge of the royal guards to the Zulu King, which is a big deal because the Zulu King has his own private fiefdom that's about the size of Wales, where he has almost complete autonomy. And the sort of respect that he commands from ordinary Zulus, it's like, ANC, IFP, National Party, whatever, they come and go, the king is forever. It's this really sort of deep foundational, they really believe in the Zulu monarchy quite deeply. And the Zulus actually resisted national reintegration and threatened to boycott the 94 elections. So they have the wars between the IFP and the ANC claimed, I think, 20,000 lives during the 80s, which is, I mean, like everyone says, peaceful resolution and everything. No, I mean, the ANC took, nearly 15 years and tens of thousands of people they slaughtered in order to get hegemony over the black population before they could negotiate for the so-called peaceful settlement.
A quick question that occurs to me here with the just because I have someone who knows so damn much about it, though I have discovered all the South Africans, the white South Africans still there, certainly the Afrikaner ones, seem to be well aware of the situation and its general outlines. But what would you say? What are some lessons we could derive just from this part specifically as regards the prospects for alliances and the way minority groups are pushed together? What lessons would you say there are for white communities elsewhere as regards alliances and their shifting fates?
Okay, first lesson is going to be the dumb, obvious one, which is if you guys can't organize something together, then you're done for. So before you start thinking about stuff like forming allegiances with other ethnic groups, power blocks, institutions, financial markets, anything, you have to be able to organize in your own group. And so I started out by mentioning that the Afrikaners had completely lost all forms of collective organization and self-confidence. English is my first language, and I'm forgetting this stuff. Anyway, but they lost everything for a long while, and then in about 2006, a couple of guys started something called AfriForum, and a couple of years before that, there was an old white mine workers union called it was literally just called MWU, the Mine Workers Union, Mijnwerkers Unie, and they changed their name to Solidariteit in to copy the Polish who resisted the communists with their
That's the
workers' unions.
origin. Their origin is in the mine workers. Okay.
Right. So these two organizations, the third leg of this sort of, I've heard some people compare it to, so a traditional cooking pot down here is called a driepoort. It's like this huge cast iron cauldron with three little legs that you put on the coals. So the third leg of the driepoort is Oranje. Oranje was founded in 1991, same year I was born, and but the idea goes back to the mid 70s in reaction to something called the Vihan report. So this is why the unions were important. Is there was a? I'm sorry for going on all these tangents, but it's kind of important to understand where things come from. In 1977, in the aftermath of a general strike that happened in 73, there was this big report that was commissioned, understanding labor relations with the black population and so on. And they decided, okay, this is actually not sustainable. And while this report was being compiled, we had the Soweto uprising, which is a rebellion against Afrikaans language education in the white areas of South Africa by the little pockets of black population that lived within that. And because the state security handled it so badly and killed so many school children, it's just absolute international. Nobody, like even most of the reactionary whites in the country, sort of thought, yeah, this is not right. Everyone just sort of collectively came to the assessment that, look, this is not going to hold together. This is going to end. So we have to be in control of the reform process going down. So from 1977 until 94 was actually a long process of dismantling apartheid. And from that period on, they removed the color bar gradually in various sectors. The Solidariteit eventually wound up as being one of the last remaining white labor unions. And the only the only organizations left that represented Afrikaners were the University of Stellenbosch, which radically went to the left by the mid 2000s, and now they have no English and ban people from speaking Afrikaans even in private. It's really extraordinary. Then you have like cultural institutions which are holding on by the skin of their teeth. And then you have the Dutch Reformed Church, which has gone absolutely insane. I don't even know where to go with that. When you talk about like Church of England level insanity, but fortunately Afrikaners are not ones for obeying, and so you've got local branches which don't go with what the Synod says. So whole other thing. Complete collapse of all institutions under conditions of being this vanishingly tiny minority who are universally demonized. And in the mid-2000s, AfriForum managed to get its legs up doing a publicity stunt related to Nestle buying milk from Grace Mugabe, and they called it blood milk, like blood diamonds were a thing once upon a time. So they got some attention with that, used it to gain subscribers and advocates and donations, and leveraged it into a civil rights organization that fights for legal rights for, minorities in South Africa, primarily Afrikaners.
But just a quick thing. So what we have here is a situation where you say it's very important for everybody to get their house in order first relative to their own group or groups in this sense, because here, this is a very important point for the idea of white, right? For everyone else outside of South Africa, you can say, well, white, right? But here you have very different historical allegiances and interests.
Here it was obvious.
Afrikaners and English.
Yeah.
Right?
But here it was obvious. The racial consciousness thing is impossible to avoid, and very few people are capable of really doing the I don't see race stuff. It's very obvious. Like a lot of people just pretend they don't see it and then go on with their lives within their little ethnic communities. That's actually the majority. I would say the majority. Then there's the biggest sort of minority, the largest plurality here would be people who are, understand that the racial antagonism is unavoidable, and you have to find a way of dealing with that politically or otherwise. And then there's a little minority that are very vocal, and they tend to be more upper class, and they tend to be more English, who go the other way and say, well, we're actually the bad people. But the way that they do this is, you've got to understand, so because of the English Afrikaans thing, Afrikaners have been more underclass, and they've also been more ethnocentric. And so the class signifiers to say, well, we're not like these sort of backwards Afrikaners who still believe in Bronze Age prophets like Jesus Christ, and still marry with it's things like that. And so part of a lot of, and English are more urbanized, so they'll tend to, you'll tend to find English people, particularly in Cape Town, be very, very woke. And when you're woke in South Africa, there's a whole other dimension to it from what you find in Western Europe. I mean, Western Europe, it's all sort of, cosplay and narcissism. Over here, it steers into suicidal delusion territory. I mean, I did really, really, really crazy people. And yeah, I don't know where. I mean, you get sort of stuff like there's these 3 white women who come from a town called Hermanus, who presented themselves to the black community as witches, and organized them to do these huge, large-scale land invasions, where they took both private and public land and would burn down stores and all kinds of crazy shit. And they have ties to sort of local black property speculation, cartels, and things like that. And it's the kind of shit that goes that you will get left-wing white people getting engaged in South Africa is on a whole other level to what you will see in the West.
So that seems like a lesson of its own, that there's a weird sort of downward spiral of nihilism that begins to I guess, emerge as a result of the overwhelming pressure from the majority, and probably the weight of consensus that dominates all of the discourse in the media. But you mentioned left versus right when you mention solidariteit, or whatever it's called,
solidarity.
When you mention this group, they're a labor union, right? So I would, or they came out of those roots. So I would assume, well, that would be a place where I'd go looking for leftist, internationalist kind of attitudes. So do you see like a left-right division among the white groups that are organizing? And how would a sort of fundamental underpinning of leftism conflict in a way that I would guess or assume with the mandate to protect an ethnic group? You see what I'm saying? Is solidarity in some respect being leftist, unsuited?
No, they're not.
Okay, all right.
No, they're not. The thing is, they're quite right wing. They're anti. The long term goal of this organization is to build a parallel state within South Africa, and they're going a fair way of doing it. They've started. They've laid sort of the groundwork for a program they call Ankerdorpe, or anchor towns, where the idea is to help white people move into these conurbations that are majority Afrikaans, in order to safeguard, sort of concentrate their power and be able to get control of their own resources and their own spatial zones and everything for security and so on. And it's sort of because Orania exploited an extremely weird and unique legal circumstance where they established themselves during the last term of the National Party's government, and then there was sort of this interim period before they redrew all of the municipal boundaries, and they sued to gain control of their region and managed to get it by some miracle before all of the sort of justice system had been flipped over. And so now they basically are entirely in control of their own sovereign territory. And and they grow by about 10% every year, and they're getting more and more ambitious as time goes on. But for the rest of South Africa, there's the complications of there's all of these sort of complications of the way they draw municipal boundaries. Let me give you a good example. Let's see if I can share something. Sorry, I've got something. I actually have something over here. If you'll let me show you. So for God's sake,
You just need to. I think choose
I've got a
it, and
bad
then
mouse.
I can put it up.
Absolutely. So I've just got a really terrible mouse. So I was struggling to get it to work. So I'll show you a picture of Pretoria. So here we go. Present, share screen. Please load. There we go. So, I mean, I don't know if hopefully you guys can see this. So Pretoria is
nope. You have to select it to. Oh wait, there it is. Sorry. Yep. Hang on.
All right. So okay, this is a good example. So you can see sort of voting in ethnicity. So that blue area, the left map is voting, the right map is race. So the blue area on the left are the people who vote for the Democratic Alliance, which is the liberal opposition party. It's mostly run by English South Africans and Jewish South Africans. That's the upper echelons of their party. They sort of kind of claim that they're non-racial and everything, which they are, to be fair, but the leadership has continued to be dominated by Anglophones for the past 20 odd years. They have a complicated history that stretches back to the first party that won control of this country back in 1910, which they don't talk about much because that party actually established the whole basis of apartheid before the National Party got into power. So they don't like to talk about that. But yeah. The thing is, on the right, you'll see the ethnicity. So that orange color is colored, the brown color is black, and the blue is white people. What you'll notice here is that you've got this sort of, if you know what Pretoria looks like, that blue zone is mostly like the real Pretoria. And then you've got this huge area around it that includes like all of these outlying sort of townships and so on. So the district boundaries for Tshwane, which is the name of the municipality that Pretoria lies in, includes a black majority that's sort of part of the city, but not really. And so you've got this ethnically contiguous zone, which has somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million Afrikaans people. Actually, I think it's closer to 1 million now because you've had huge influx of Afrikaners from other parts of the country where it's not doing them too much good. So you've got a whole city where, like, instead of being an English city, like a lot of other urban centers are, it's fully Afrikaans. And but they have no sort of democratic control. And what happens is, see, now I'm going to see if I can find. There's a post I did in this series where I covered the here we go. Covered the elections in the area. So you have this. So I'm sure you can see this. It says the election results in Gauteng. So I had to chart the ANC on the right-hand side of the graph because they dwarf everyone else and you can't see what's going on. So they're sitting at about just shy of 60% for the province. So just for right up until about 2009 when Jacob.
Sorry, are we looking at the same thing? I'm just seeing Ethno-Democracy Part 2, and it looks like it's showing your view count.
Oh, Sherbet. Okay, well, hold on. Oh yes, because it opened it in another bloody tab. That's irritating. So let me try and do that again. Let me try and do that again. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to share I'm going to share the data set that I actually used for this, because this is going to help. So I'm going to look at the national elections first, so everyone can get a quick view, and then I'll go back to Pretoria. So national election results. This is everything since 1994. And I included all of the polls that sort of project what's 2004. I averaged them, and I added that as the last point. You can see this, right?
Sorry, I had to jump out of full screen to be able to unmute myself. Yes.
Okay, yeah. Okay, cool. Right, we're back here. So the national election results, which you can see, again, I had to chart the ANC on the right and everyone else on the left. So on the left, you can see it goes up to 30%, and the other right, it goes up to 80%. So ANC sort of bumps around 70% for right up until about 2009, then starts to decline. Because it took that long to actually destroy everything that the white government had built, and because during the first decade and a half of ANC rule, there's a lot of redistribution of wealth, a lot of free services that everyone got, that everyone had access to: free healthcare, free education, water, electricity connections, housing. That meant that black people's life, sort of quality of life went up really significantly. But now we're kind of paying for it because we can't keep anything running. All the trains are falling apart. The whole thing is going tits up, right? But it's still taking a while for black people to react to this. And the way they're reacting, and this is the best indicator, is that they're not voting for other parties. They're just staying away from the ballot. So the green line here shows the voting age population going up nice and steeply. The turnout is this little blue ziggy-zaggy line at the bottom. And that's in absolute numbers. The reason it goes up and down is that national elections and local elections have different turnout. Most people show up in greater numbers for national elections than local ones. But I needed the local elections in order to sort of help with the overall picture. The thing over here is that when you look at the percentage turnout, that's the red line, which is charted on the right-hand side of the graph. It's gone down as a percentage of the voting age population. It's gone down to just above 30%. So just over a third of the population actually go to the polls. And because white people still tend to go to the polls a lot, and it's black people who are staying away, you get this kind of thing where, despite the white population declining massively, well, not massively, it flatlines kind of after 94, and there's a gentle decline. But what you get is that these trends have come together so that you get an almost stable representation of white parties. And I think, if this thing will stop freezing, I can show you the one where I grouped them together by racial voting blocks. But what you see is that all of the voting blocks are relatively stable, and you get the ANC coasting at around just above 60% when you group them with their sort of breakaway parties, the EFF and COPE, and the DA, EFF, and Vryheidsfront, DA National Party when they were still around, and Vryheidsfront. If you add them together, sorry, my computer's acting retarded, so it's going to take a while before I can see anything.
It's probably a result of the processor hit, of doing the live stream and having to display. So
yeah, I know. Flip! Now I've zoomed in too far. Anyway, why don't I have it? Must be a late version of the. Must be an old version of the file. Anyway, I'm not going to go hunting around for the latest version. But basically, what you end up seeing is over here you get you get a big flat line, and like I did it for KwaZulu-Natal as well. You get like a big green line at the top that sort of zigzags stably around 60%. You have a little line at the bottom that bumps around 20%. That's, your ethnic minority representation parties. So the reason the ANC has been going down recently is because of the rise of a party called the Economic Freedom Fighters. The Economic Freedom Fighters, the EFF, are led by the former head of the Youth League for the ANC. That's Julius Malema.
It also seems interesting that they appear, you see the little, I noticed when I was looking at the first chart, you showed that the little red line for the EFF appears a short time after you see the plunging fortunes of the ANC, which almost suggests that they launched that party in order to take advantage of.
No, there's a specific reason. So what happened was in 2012, there was this thing called the Marhobane Massacre. It was the biggest state massacre since, apartheid days. And what happened was that there was striking mine workers. So the ruling party controls the workers' unions for the most part. And this means that they can strike up corrupt deals with the mines, where they can keep any kind of collective action from happening. And what happened is that rock drill operators, okay, I understand why they're making these demands. I don't think it's completely unreasonable, but the market doesn't allow for it. Basically, if you're a rock drill operator, you get all kinds of problems with nerve damage and arthritis and shitty things like this if you do it for a long time. And they protested. They wanted medical cover, good retirement, rise in wages that was out of touch with market responses. The unions wouldn't let them do it. The current president was in charge of the union that had the monopoly at the time. And they broke away, formed their own union, started assassinating shop stewards and policemen and security guards. And then when they finally had a protest confrontation with the police, despite the fact that they had no firearms of their own, the police just machine gunned them and then hunted down another dozen and a half and executed them at point blank range. So it was a really sort of crazy situation. And Julius Malema, who'd been involved in politics since the age of 13, he was in charge of the Youth League at this time. The Youth League is always the most vocal part of the party. So what they did over there is he attacked the president for killing his own people. And this is a guy who said, I will kill for Zuma. Now he's saying Zuma's got to go. He hates his own people. He's in collusion with white monopoly capital, which is the big threat. It's sort of Black South Africa's equivalent of Zionist occupied government, right? So he calls for this. And he gets kicked out of the party. And his response is to start his own party, and he takes almost the entire Youth League with him in one fell swoop. So he's cleaned himself up and become much more shrewd recently, but he's still a really, really, really dangerous bugger. And he uses his party as a sort of a policy wedge to force the ANC to get more serious about communism and anti-white policies. That's the general thrust of it.
Okay, so it wasn't a result of recognizing that the ANC was going down. So I stand corrected, and I'm happy to be so. So coming back to the point about the electoral aspects, the original map of Pretoria, and these everything that you've graphed here
right.
As regards electoral activity. What do we learn here?
Well, what you mainly learn is that, first of all, South Africa managed to redraw the boundaries to basically drown out all of the minority centers. So
it's basically like what you call it? Good God, gerrymandering in the United States in order to set the electoral districts up in order to make sure that in places like Pretoria, you lump them together electorally so that they can't sort of chart their own destiny.
It's much worse in Durban. I mean, the whole of KwaZulu-Natal is not one place, even if the minorities are in the majority in a given town. There's no place you will be able to get representation.
Right, and just tell me when you want me to bring that screen back up, sure. If you do.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll show, I mean, if you want to look at some, there's a nice little ethnic map of Durban, which is kind of fun to look at, that I added to my latest article that I'll show in a minute. But uh, you don't have to share now, so don't worry. But it's okay. So you got drowned out like this, and the justification is twofold, and it was supported by even whites also supported this. The idea is that you've got to share resources between black and white areas. And something that's not well known is that this particular idea started under P.W. Botha at the height of apartheid in the early 80s. So yeah, the part of the dismantling began early. So, I mean, while everyone was screaming at us for being outrageous racists, they were already planning for winding down and starting to redistribute resources and everything. I mean, in '77, they actually decided to betray Rhodesia and help blockade them, which is why they lost the Civil War. But yeah, so the later sort of apartheid government presidents were not nearly as reactionary as people think they were. Not nearly. And I mean, you've got to also understand that most of the military hierarchy was Freemasons. I mean, my father-in-law, interestingly enough, when I first met him, he told the story of why he didn't, why he didn't make it beyond major, and when he got selected to be captain, he decided the first thing that he would do is hold a lecture for all of his subordinates, explaining the evils of Freemasonry and why it's a satanic organization. And within 24 hours, he got a call from headquarters telling him, "You are not officer material." And he said, "Don't worry, I've already resigned my commission." And he walked straight out into the private sector. So he served in Afghanistan and Iraq and all kinds of weird places. Lives off the grid without a bank account. Interesting fellow.
Well, yeah, quite. I want to jump in with a parentheses though. One of the questions I had wanted to ask about was, if I were a part of the presumably Afrikaner dominated pre-dissolution government, before we all had to listen to the songs about, we are the world, we are the children, and look at the Coca-Cola ads and everything. And if I had been a part of the military and I had seen this coming, if it had been me, for example, I would have said, all right, I'm going to make sure that very quietly before all this goes down, I'm going to put together all kinds of weapon stockpiles across South Africa and make sure that they get quietly buried so that you have them in case you need them for a rainy day or something.
There are a lot of stories of this. And
but would a Masonic, major and above, or lieutenant colonel, or wherever they drew the line, would that sort of arrangement have stood in the way of any such preparations?
Possibly. I mean, look, the thing is, it's hard to know what happened because a lot of documents were burned with the handover of the government. There's a lot of floor crossing. People went into different parties. There's a lot of shuffling going on. But what's interesting is that a big scandal happened about 5 or 6 years ago when someone got deselected from the party list for the Democratic Alliance. This is the Liberal Opposition Party that's doing relatively well in the metros. So they got deselected from the party list because they weren't a Freemason, and went running to the newspapers and said, okay, these people are Freemasons. The Freemasons are deciding who gets selected. Now, the interesting thing is our Parliament building is literally owned by the Freemasons. So that the Parliament itself is on the grounds of a Freemason lodge.
Interesting. I guess they're being literal about that whole business of building buildings, huh?
Oh yeah. I mean, the thing is, it goes back very far. I mean, even the Voortrekkers, the first Afrikaners who trekked out into the middle of the country to escape British rule, there's a relative of mine who led one of the biggest campaigns that became the most famous, Piet Retief. He was a Freemason, and the Voortrekker monument up there in Pretoria is designed by Freemasons. You can see it in the design. It's all these sort of like circles, right angles. You know the whole spiel. It looks very, very modernist, and there's all kinds of like typical stuff where they've got they've shaped holes in the roof so the light shines on the epitaph at the right time of year. That kind of stuff. It's wonderfully elegant, but it's also very Freemasony. So the Freemasons get involved everywhere. One of the few countries where there's still a major deciding factor. I mean, the only one I can think of off the top of my head is France. Every now and again, in France, you'll see the Freemasons will come up, make a political statement. We don't like this policy, and we're going to do something about it if you go ahead with it. Right. They're openly active in France. It's not. Yeah, it's kind of funny.
This is a fascinating subject that I would love to get into, but to keep it focused on the on white minority. No, it's fascinating.
I think the main point here is that the English are not.
Can you summarize? Can you summarize the role?
Power's back on.
Blessed power. I love it. This is a true South African stream. You get excited because the electricity comes back. Can you summarize whether or not Freemasons themselves played any role, before we move on from that, because it's very interesting, played any role in either screwing or advancing the potential future fortunes of the white minority in South Africa?
I think it's hard to say. I know that the Liberal Party is very, the DA, as they're called. So the DA is not, I know that acronym stands for District Attorney in America, so I'm trying to, anyway, so the DA, they're loath to take any sort of strong moves against the government over here, despite there being 20 years of very, very aggressive racial discrimination against whites and other minorities, huge amounts of corruption stuff. I mean, most of the things they spend their money on, if you look at their budget, is getting legal consultants to write very elegant bits of legislation that they know will never pass because they're a minority in the parliament. So it's a lot of like florid treading water stuff. And now it's coming to crunch time because the country's really falling apart and the end is very obvious. And they're still doing things like silly things like. For example, so the new employment equity laws have floated down and said that actually the quotas for several provinces, for several minorities, are 0. So like you're not allowed to employ Indians in Limpopo anymore, like that kind of thing. And their response is, well, we're going to launch a legal case. And then the head of the party asked everyone to violate these laws. But then the party won't violate them with their civil servant selections. So, yeah, you've got all of this kind of stuff where they're kind of, and they're very against Cape independence. So 2/3 of the people who vote DA in the Western Cape province are for independence. But the leadership of the party is vehemently against them. So now they've got to play a containment maneuver in order to give them just enough to say that they're doing something so that they don't lose votes, but not enough that they actually get it. But a good friend of mine, Phil Craig, well, I wouldn't say good friend, I mean, I know him and we're friendly. But a friend of mine, Phil Craig, who runs the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, has been good at dragging him along. So he's actually an Englishman who came to South Africa and married an Afrikaans woman and he's raising speaking Afrikaans. And so he lives in the same town as me. And he's been dragging the DA very, very effectively. I mean, he's a fucking real estate developer. And he's almost single-handedly been dragging the DA towards independence and autonomy. Because they can't really resist most of the overtures he's making. And there's been a cooperation with like AfriForum and Solidarity and all these people in a big forum trying to drag, more independence, more autonomy, more reforms. So the general thing is that you've got this party that has control of the one province that the ANC doesn't have control over, who is resisting. They're actively trying to prevent themselves from getting the power that would be needed to protect their own base. They brag in public about how much free services they're offering to illegal settlements. So in the rest of the country, so the ANC will help facilitate black people to come from the rest of the country and settle near conurbations in the Western Cape in huge numbers. So these are often violent. There's a lot of racketeering going on. There's like illegal gangs tied to the ruling party that extract rent from people who settle there, and it's all in tin shacks. So if you go into Cape Town, you see all of these oceans of tin shacks. Most of that's from the last 10 to 15 years. And the DA's position is, well, we're going to get these people to vote for us, because when they come to the Western Cape, they'll see how much better we govern. And then they'll vote. None of them vote. I mean, the votes, black votes for the DA have remained below 20% almost everywhere across the country, consistently. Doesn't matter how much free services they get them. And they're spending like, 2/3 of the budget at a municipal level and at a provincial level on giving these people free services. It's crazy.
Well, this brings up an interesting angle here, and maybe this will bring us back to some of the things that you may have wished to cover as regards voting patterns and the rest. I'm afraid I distracted you, but early on by asking other questions. But what would you say the lessons are from South Africa for present or future white minorities as regards the entire idea of democracy? On the one hand, it almost seems like not just a joke, but a bad joke, right? The idea that, democracy matters and that the rule of law matters and all these other things. But at the same time, the way in which you showed me that it seems that the white role in elections, if I understood you correctly, has remained consistent because the black participation in the elections has dropped, which has created an opportunity for whites to wield outsized power as related to this process because they continue to participate. Is this a situation where we should say, well, the whole idea of democracy has always been a joke? Or is this a situation where you can say there are opportunities people don't recognize?
Well, I think both. So I don't believe democracy is a thing that works as it says on the tin. So there's clearly no way for people to really express their preferences at a national level like that. But what I'll say is, you notice I've been describing a process of the national government winding down apartheid without asking permission from anyone. No one knew it was supposed to be really happening. This process of reform didn't happen with consultation, and everyone was invested in that national government, so that when it disappeared, no one had anything. There were very few people who saw it coming. Even Solidariteit at the time didn't see it coming. They only got their act together with their new and current leader in 1997, 3 years after they'd lost control of the government. So what you've got is you've got Orania, which is at the time it's an absolutely tiny group. It's like not even 100 people who decided, okay, we're going to take this tiny town in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the desert, and we're going to start building a town to start a new, like, Afrikaner nation from scratch, because that was the level they were operating on. And then you have maybe the other people you can mention would be a party that's now called the Vryheidsfront Plus. It's formed from the remnants of several right-wing parties that were trying to there were several right-wing parties that were trying to prevent the National Party from ending apartheid or reforming it in the way that they were, or whatever the case may be. And so these people sort of decided, well, very late in the game, only in the 80s, did they really sort of get any traction, saying, actually, this is not working. Black rule is gonna come if you keep doing this, and it's not going to go well. The problem is that if you wait until it's that late, there's nothing you can do. The difference is in the West, that opportunity is there to actually make a bit of a difference. You're not necessarily going to win everything, but you can probably make more of a difference than you think by exploiting political wedges. I mean, you can already see the effect of the whole. I mean, from my perspective, from outside, okay. I mean, Ron DeSantis, people are sort of, wailing and gnashing of teeth looking at the split in the Republican right, because ideal ticket would have been a combo of Trump and DeSantis, and it's too late for that. But from my perspective, the interesting thing is you've got DeSantis is now sort of setting a bar where they're saying, well, actually, the right-wing position is Trump is now the moderate everywhere. You've got your option of like, okay, you've got left-wing loonies, and you've got Ron DeSantis, who's very serious but slightly scary to a lot of people on the center and left, and then Trump is now the center. And granted, there's still this leftward ratchet, blah blah blah. But I think the fact that you've actually got a significant proportion of the Republican Party that wants to move things to the right, and there exists this network, means there's something to work with, and it's not too late. So what I would do is, it depends where you are in society. I mean, that's definitely something you can work with and use and grow in the future. The other thing that you're lacking is dedicated, something like AfriForum, which is a civil rights organization, something that's dedicated to fighting your battles in the courts. That's something I don't see. And there's plenty of people who I can imagine who would fund it, who would participate, who would volunteer. And the other thing is looking at, well, are there any gaps where the government's just simply not offering services for poor white people in certain areas? How can you get a sort of nationalist movement that replaces those? Because that's actually one of the biggest ways.
That's like the Hezbollah approach, right, in Lebanon.
Correct.
Saying we're going to come in, we're going to offer all these services. Yeah.
Right. And I mean, that's what we've been doing here. I mean, AfriForum Solidarity, what they started with at a community level is filling potholes. So if you can get an organization,
just for our viewers who have never seen pictures of an African pothole, I'm not sure that pothole quite covers what we're talking about here. This is like small canyons forming in roads.
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, that's in some places, and I can go into like the weeds with fucking trucking regulations and road to rail freight and shit like that, which unfortunately I happen to know.
Right. But in this case, we're talking about the way in which they can go after local services. Right.
Correct. And so it's another one of those things where, I mean, you've got to get creative. I mean, I read a thing a while ago on sort of, Bay Area rationalist section of the blogosphere, Slate Star Codex, writing about, what do the Amish actually do with regard to like medical treatment? And the thing is, they don't insure themselves. They have these sort of cooperative mutual aid organizations that they use instead. So there's this, they're like whole other different ways that you can organize society to get outside of what the standard operating procedure is. And it doesn't have to mean, going and starting like some rural commune or anything. It's just, any way of organizing, anywhere you are, that does something that's not dependent on the current power structure and has an identity component. And I think the thing is, the reason that Afrikaners have succeeded so much is because they have that ethnic identification.
And they also have a very strong tradition, correct me if I'm wrong, of local organization at the level of the church.
Yes and no. I mean, certainly that's huge. But I think one of the things that has to be borne in mind is that Afrikaners are very, very hard to organize. Everyone wants to pull in their own direction.
Oh, so it's like cat herding.
Exactly.
The independent people type thing.
But they're well aware of it. It's like it's sort of a joke amongst Afrikaners as well. It's not like it's not like an epithet. It's they have that old joke about Afrikaners stranded on a desert island, someone comes and finds him and sees all of these buildings. What's that? Oh, that's my house. What's that? Oh, that's the town hall. What's that? That's he sees like this burnt out. Yeah, that's my church. Next to it, there's this huge burnt out wreck, and he says, "What's that?" Oh, that's the other church. They were heretics. Like.
All right.
So,
it's a very specialized joke. Okay, I'm learning.
Right. So, in terms of real effects, there's a fantastic book that I think anyone who wants to read, loves military history and stuff should read. Is Commando by Deneys Riots. He was son of the secretary for the Free State when they were entering the Second Boer War, and then he volunteered. So he participated in most of the major battles in the conventional section of the war, and then he joined the guerrilla campaign as well. So, very fantastic overview of the whole conflict from like a very ground level perspective. But he talks about like they get together for one battle, and they've got to take some hill. And the commander says, "Okay, guys, this is the plan. We're going to do this and this and this, and we're going to go up in like 15 minutes. We got to go." And then like half the troop says, "Nah, fuck off. It's time for coffee." And they peel away. And then the rest of them have to just do it by themselves. And that's kind of what it's like.
But there's actually, to me, it seems as though that there's cause for hope there, because it suggests that if you were going to take, because I think about Americans, right? And we have the whole like mind your own business and expect the same, right? Like I find the capital L libertarianism quite tedious, but there is a sort of Native American libertarianism that is basically leave me the fuck alone, and I'll make up my own damn mind about it, and that creates all sorts of problems. Whereas and you don't see it as much with. I don't know. That's an oversimplification, because you can see like Scandinavians that go into places like Minnesota and they collectivize hard, right? So I don't mean to be too simple about it, but where you find Scots and English descent, and in the South. Even Irish to a considerable extent, like not the Scandinavians, also French. They'll be very much like, fuck you very much, we're going to do our own thing. And that suggests to me a big hurdle in terms of collective organization. But from what you say, the Afrikaners seem to be equally described by the term cat herding. And yet, even in the face of what you're talking about, your joke about the guy on the island and the business about, refusing to take that hill together, somehow this very group has managed to put some things together. Why do you think that is?
It's interesting. So during the early 20th century, so we've been conquered by the British. There was this awkward period where we were a customs union, and then there was a unification. And during the 10-year sort of customs union period, Afrikaans people managed to take control of all 4 provinces of what would become South Africa. And so when they went into the Union, they were ethnically dominant in all the major regions, and everyone voted for one party, and that's the South African Party that was led by Jan Smuts. And later on, and here's the weird bit, so in the early 1920s, after J.P. Morgan financed the Oppenheimer family, who are a sort of cadet branch of the Rothschild dynasty, they financed them to take over and you've got to remember, the Rothschild family financed the creation of the Union. They bankrolled Cecil Rhodes in his whole sort of instigation of the Second World War. So they're still the biggest recipients of black economic empowerment contracts in South Africa through their agent Martin Kingston. So, yeah. And the Oppenheimers actually wrote the black economic empowerment legislation in 2003.
Silence in the fucking chat. That's all I'm saying. Go on, Mr. Dagan.
Yeah, I just thought I'd drop a little bit of a thing there. But the interesting thing about this is the Afrikaners, they split early on because they tried to have an armed rebellion while the First World War was going on, because they didn't want to fight the British wars, overseas. That failed. People were hung, and the rest of them retreated into labor unions and sort of communal organizations, and they basically built copies of all the British financial and insurance institutions through mutual aid societies. So they built their own sort of economy from scratch when they were living at like African levels of poverty. They organized together to build up this basic sort of platform of capital and land and everything. And they got together with the white unions got together with the Communist Party in the early 20s and tried to seize the mines. And they were put down.
So you could see why I asked about Solidarity having a leftist background, and
right. But here's what you want to understand: Afrikaners have entertained any idea that is against the British for more than 200 years.
Any people that will give them guns and money to
right. And so this is the thing, particularly in the interwar period, it was a whole thing of like, the way you have to understand is they'd never give their soul to any of these sort of movements, but it was always like, what can we borrow? Right? So they entertained ideas of, well, maybe we should try something like Bolshevism, maybe something like Nazism, maybe something like the Italians, So anything that's like not British imperialism. So it was like, South African Communist Party stands for a white South Africa, that kind of thing. They protested in favor of a color bar, right? They were put down, and then 2 years later, the Nationalist Party was elected for their first term. Tried to nationalize the mines, was threatened with all kinds of crazy economic sanctions and stuff, and with sabotage by the Oppenheimer family. They threatened to blow the mines up. So they backed down. Next election, they decided, even though they were likely to win it, they fused with the South African Party because they were afraid of broedertwis, which is sort of like a strife between brothers. So it was splitting the Afrikaans community, and it was causing a lot of pain. And because there's this tendency to run in different directions, everyone was terrified that this would mean something like civil war emerging. So
just for the record, quick insert. Don't lose this point. Keep going. I don't want to derail you. But is it true? It seems to me that everything sounds slightly cooler in Afrikaans. Yeah, all these just broeders.
It's sort of like imagine. It's sort of like if you imagine an extremely rude Flemishman. That's how I think about it. I mean, I used when I lived in the Netherlands, we got Belgian radio, sort of radio from over the border, and it's sort of they're like Afrikaans pussycats, really. That's how they sound to me.
Okay. So come back to the mines. They were threatening to blow them up, and they were worried about the brother infighting.
So the result of this is that there was a sort of big lesson that was learned, I think, deep in the intellectual culture of Afrikaners, that whatever you do, you have to preserve the unity of the nation, the unity of the ethnos. And what you see now, even 100 years later, is that AfriForum and Solidarity, there are many things in which they're quite hardline. They're willing to move quite seriously and make the right moves. But there's stuff that they won't touch. And one among them is that they're not going to pick sides between any of the minority representing parties. So we don't talk about, we're against ANC and EFF and whatever, but we're not going to promote DA, Vryheidsfront, anything like that. We stay away from that. We're not going to entertain, if you're not going to sort of chase policies that might split the Afrikaans people on any issue. So, I mean, like they got, when the vaccine mandate came out, they nearly, it nearly broke the organization to take the stance they did, which is we're firmly against mandatory vaccinations and things. That was a hard decision to make. That was the first time they took a really divisive stance, and they lost people, employees and stuff. And but generally speaking, unless it's extremely serious and it's a real matter of deep conscience, they're going to steer away from anything. And
so it's kind of like don't punch right, don't counter signal as a general
exactly
rule, right?
Yeah, and because the people in charge are extremely conscientious. I mean, like I've known a lot of them personally, and the thing about these guys is, like, even if you're coming from a liberal perspective, even if you're like a lefty liberal type, if you knew any of these people, they're some of the most extremely earnest and principled individuals you'll ever meet. Kind, warm-hearted, decent, hardworking, honest, and they take it seriously, not just to preserve their own people, but to have good relations with the other ethnicities around them. I mean, there's a lot of effort going into maintaining sort of age-old pacts with other tribes. So there's a tribe amongst the Tswana nation called the Barolong Basileka tribe, and during the Great Trek, they gave cattle and water to these people, to Afrikaners traveling through the Transvaal, so that they wouldn't starve to death in the scrubland. And 100 years later, 150 years later, whatever it is, a few years ago, there was an issue in which, so we still have these tribally governed areas throughout South Africa. About a third of the population live in them. And there was a succession dispute because the ANC intervened, because the guy who was going to inherit the title didn't want the ANC to do some infrastructure development. It doesn't matter what. So what they did is they went back in time and disputed this, an element of the succession of that tribe from back in the 19th century. And AfriForum came in and gave them free legal counsel and defended them from this political interference.
So another very, very important lesson here would seem to be that if anyone does you a good turn, if anyone has historically been an ally, never forget it. And that, I think, is just a general lifelong lesson. Like, people will give me shit. I've had people that I have come later to disagree with significantly in important ways, and they've been guests on my channel, and I just don't talk shit about them. They were a guest on my channel, helped me build it by coming, and it's just a matter of being honorable. I realize it's no longer a fashionable term, but if people have allied with you in the past, those are very important relationships that you're supposed to maintain across generations. I mean, that's a whole basic sort of right wing or traditionalist idea, is that you honor pacts and alliances and relationships that have been built over time. And we don't have I'll end my parentheses here in just a moment. In places like the United States, we don't have there are certainly families that remember very old relationships with other families, but that's more the exception than the rule, because everyone here is so freshly minted. We're all
And you move around a lot. I think you move house on average every 11 years. I was reading the stats.
Yes, and that's there's cultural encouragement for that. Though that's now changing with the tech world, but with remote work and stuff, we'll see a different world emerge. But the point being, even though we don't have as many places and ways where that would seem an appropriate lesson for us, as related to, for example, another tribe that helped us 150 years ago, I think it is a lesson that we can carry forward in terms of the more immediate relationships that we have with people that we talk to, that we have on as guests, that we engage with online. Like, try to have some class as regards, being a consistent, being consistent in any respect, and how you deal with people, particularly ones who have helped you.
Yeah, I mean, you can actually ask Adams Mansale about this. He was present. So when they went down to visit these people in their sort of little tribal capital, all the elders came out, and together they recounted the historical oral tradition of their first meeting back in sort of 1837, 1838.
Based.
And I mean, like, the Afrikaners know their history. They've all read the books. And so they're listening to this and go, flipping hell, this is remarkably accurate. It's like down to like who said what at what moment and everything, And Aaron's always told me about so there's this huge, you know what succulent plants are?
Well, yeah, like cacti, right?
They're like cactuses, but they don't have thorns. And there's a lot of variance in shapes, but they're sort of, yeah, they're big, fat sort of leaves and things, like
Right,
cactus
like
as well.
yeah.
Yeah, stuff like that. It's hard to describe if you haven't seen the ones that grow here, but anyway. So there's a huge one that's ancient, like a massive thing. It's like the size of a house. That's growing by the kraal. I think you'd call it a corral, where it's like a big stone sort of circle that you keep
Circular
cattle in.
defensive works, right? And settlement.
No. It's just for keeping cattle in, right? So, so they've so they had this huge succulent. I can't remember what it's called. I have one that's related to it in my garden. That's called a jade plant, but I don't know what the one that they had is called. But so Aaron's took just a little leaf off the plant, and he's grown it into quite a handsome little. It looks like a little bonsai tree, but with cartoon fat leaves. It's kind of what it looks like. And so he's grown a piece of that tree and taken it home with himself, because it can grow from very simple cuttings. And I mean, me hearing this whole story, I always found it like actually quite moving, because how often in life do you see anyone who's got that degree of, honor, and hearing these old people who've been sitting on these stories say, we see now that what we did for you is being repaid.
Well, it's just the universe works. It's a very strange thing, and I don't want to go too far off on this tangent because I want more of your lessons. But there is a certain way in which, confronted with the randomness and the various evils, the uncertainties, the shifting fortunes of life, which obviously are baked into this fucking pie, right? That has its savory bits and its shitty chunks, right? The experience of life is going to give you an ample dose of shit that cannot be relied upon. It's just the nature of the exercise, right? At least here in the world of men and of things and of events, right? God is a separate subject, right? But when you come across another person who says, no, I will make consistency with you by honoring oaths and these kinds of things, it's a foundation of civilization. And you can see that when that falls apart, your collective cooperation falls to pieces. Things like marriage, another area where you have oaths, right? Hippocratic oaths. The medical profession is perhaps one of the most disgusting and corrupt that exists in this day and age. The oaths that people take before they become, judges or advocates and the rest. It's all falling to pieces. So yeah, I can see why it's moving, because there's a feeling you have when it's like the bromance moment. You shake your bro's hand and he's there for you, got your back. And it's so often bullshit that when it's real, it's intense.
Yeah, I mean, growing up, I had a friend who was. So I'm a direct descendant of Petrati's brother, who stayed behind on the farm. The farm's actually just up the road. My cousin is I think 8th or 9th direct male line, still owns the farm that Petratif was born on. And this friend of mine who I met in primary school in Johannesburg, he was a direct descendant of Petratif down the female line, because Petratif only had surviving daughters. And he was the first son at the end of this one female line going down. And it was remarkable. It was like, because I made this bond with this friend of mine, and we have this strange family connection going back 200 years. You get a bit of that, I think, because a lot of Afrikaners do trace their history. And so people ask, where's your family? You're from these people? Oh, you're bad from there. Oh,
right. And okay. all of you fuckers are cousins at this point. It must be like a giant nation of cousins because of the original settlement groups.
Yeah, I mean, there's like, a few million of us, but if you know your family tree a little bit, people start poking around and say, well, that one, Which one?
No, one good friend of mine. I used to have this guy on my channel all the time before he died. This guy Tim, and then another very, very close friend of mine. They were sitting around talking with each other, and then they discovered that they're actually cousins because they had this shared aunt. Yeah. So and we see this in like television programs and the rest. I just watched Game of Thrones again, and there's this whole scene where everybody's supposed to come support the king in the north. And they're like, we have always stood with the Starks, and people want that, but they don't want to make the commitments necessary in their actual lives to have it for themselves. Okay, so we see the idea of solidarity, leaving aside the mining organization.
It's vital. It's vital. Yeah, it's vital because you have to. The problem is that you're sitting in a world where anything that's too overt is going to be crushed. So it's very, very hard to. It is going to be hard to organize. I think it's one of those things where you're going to have to just keep taking swings at it. I mean, look, we have our own problem of like, feds and what have you. So there's a movement called the Afrikaner Weerstandsbeweging. So some of them will know they had it basically looks like a Nazi flag, but with three, like a triskelion.
I think I've seen some photos of it. It has the same vat grown, sprung up last night from under a cabbage leaf bullshit kind of look to it as our parallels.
But you know what they did? Do you know what they did on the eve of, the big talks that were about to hand over power? So they herded all of the military supporters that they had into a tiny town in a mountain valley where there was only one road going in and out. And said, we're going to wait here until the instruction comes down to act. And then when the talks were done and everything was settled, they said, you guys can go home now. And so, there were a few sort of like big stunts they pulled after that, but nothing serious. And it's really, really, really something to remember is that the stuff that is going to work in the modern world, you can't launch. I mean, think about it just in a very, very practical sense, like really nuts and bolts shit. Everyone wants to do this big military blah, 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 blah. But if you're going to do any military action, what's the big thing about military? You need supply lines, you need logistics, you need all that, right? Otherwise, it's going to be big flash in the pan and then it's all gone away and everyone gets arrested or shot or whatever. And how do you build all of that back end that supports a military action, hypothetically? Well, you need capital, you need land, you need industry, you need legal defenses, you need all this kind of stuff to hold everything in place so that you can actually function in the basics. And I think the important thing about that is you're never going to come to blows with a government of the size of the United States. That's just not going to happen. There's no chance, right? It's going to end terribly. It's not going to work out. What would work is building the infrastructure required to hold your communities together long enough to make either a political move or survive the disintegration of the state, which I think, if we're being realistic, may be a couple of generations away. I mean, the thing is, everyone said, you look at things going down and you say, oh, it can't last that long. Look at South Africa. It's taken us 30 years. It's taken us 30 years to go from, okay, middle-income country to middle-income country but falling apart. And it's like, that's falling an inch. You guys have got a mile to fall. You grow by a whole South Africa every year in terms of economic output. And so you're talking about losing sort of society. Everyone's hoping for this massive break where now we get to act.
Right. It's accelerationism. Suddenly there's the zombie outbreak and all the rules disappear. Yeah, no. And the anarcho-tyranny. Yeah, the anarcho-tyranny idea seems like much more accurate on a very, very slow arc. I'm going to step away from the computer just a moment, but I was wondering, I'll be back in just a second, and I can hear you. I was wondering if you could maybe tell us something about how the changes do happen, right? There's a guy I had hoped to get on. He's on Twitter. It's K9 something, right? He's a volunteer for some.
K9 Reaper. Oh, he's good. I put him on a list, by the way, on Twitter. I compiled a little list. I'll share it again soon when I'm done with this. I compiled a list of all the guys in South Africa who track like violence and crime and guns and things like that. And I mean, it's not many people. I don't think it's even 20. But if you follow that little list, you get sort of like you can go look at all the gory
Perfect
details.
snapshot of, yeah, but I mean,
Yeah.
just in particular, not just the more egregious acts of violence, but things like, you know, the copper cable theft is just insane. And then he was talking about recent stuff with the solar panels being stolen, and you know, these huge investments. And he had a very good point. It'll help you deal with state proofing to be off the grid, but it you know, it helps you against the tyranny side of it, but not the anarcho side of it, right? So perhaps you could you tell us what, like a bird's eye view, your own experience of how the country has changed in the years you've been alive and what people end up seeing? And as I said, I'll be right back.
Yeah. So, someone in the comments pointed out, I heard rail travel passengers down 95%. Yeah, it is. No, like I remember even when I was studying in university, like 11 years ago, I was living in Cape Town. If I wanted to go visit like my great aunt in Somerset West, I'd hop on the train, slow train, always late, you know, unreliable, seats are broken, usual stuff. But there was a train. Now there's no train. Like the town I'm in, I can't get to Cape Town by train anymore, even if I wanted to. There's just no line running. And this is normal. And I mean, the Cape is better than most places. We've lost function of most of our passenger rail. Road maintenance is bad as well. I mean, some places are just starting to become like nearly unnavigable. Freight trains, I mean, that was doing okay for a while, but I mean, recently they stole a whole section of the Sishen-Saldanha line. I mean, which is that's where, you know, our iron ore and everything gets shipped across country. It's really, really bad. Power's going out, so you get like 12-hour blackouts. Yeah, for the sake of political popularity, they've stopped most of the blackouts, but that means that the power stations are not getting their scheduled maintenance, and so they're gambling on it not blowing up the whole system before the elections in May next year, it's a big gamble. And in terms of violent crime, like I'm very lucky. I live in a small town in the rural Western Cape, which is like one of the safest places you could be in the whole bloody country. So there's petty crime here, but I don't live in any area where I have to worry about my life. I still just, you know, walk down to the shops with my.
So it's much like a suburban life or rural life in the U.S. or something. You're not way out there.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's lots of petty crime. I mean, like if you don't close the shutters on your windows at night, you're gonna get people reaching through and stuff like that. It's not bad. But in parts of Cape Town, you've got areas over there which have higher homicide rates than the front lines of World War II. Like absolutely just like shock and awe nightmare nonsense. You know, little children being used as enforcers in drug gangs, just nasty shit. But there we have a lot of cash in transit heists. I always thought it was funny. You know that what was that Jason Statham movie? I think it was Jason Statham. Where they did this like cash in transit stuff.
Oh yeah, I saw that. Well, there was that famous.
Why didn't they set that in South Africa?
Right, because I saw that one.
Such a missed opportunity.
That well-known video of the guys who are in the vehicle. There's a white driver and a black guy with the gun, literally riding shotgun, so to speak. And they got attacked, you know, and it's all on camera as the people are trying to run them off the road. And yeah, that was in.
South Africa, and he said, wasn't it? They asked him, so how are you so calm? He says, no, I pre-visualized it.
Pre-visualized.
I loved it. So the
other thing is
that guy is what the thumbnail for that list I was talking about.
You can't, and you can't. I've been in a few of my own odd situations, and if you're not a total fuck up. I mean, you don't, and I'm not claiming to be some badass, but if you've been in a few of those high stress situations, you don't have an option. You just don't have an option except to do everything you can. You can't freak out because it's going to chuck all your chances out the window. But so what if you were hanging around, because I mean, you sort of are here on a live stream, but you're with a bunch of people who aren't from South Africa, and they're like, oh man, everything's getting so crazy, you know, and you're like, fuck off, man. Where I come from, like, what lessons, what warnings about the future, what things people should look out for?
No, I mean, I think they're right. They're right to be concerned. I don't want to tell them, you know, blow them off. It's like it is going to get worse for quite a while because you don't have the stuff. It's still you're relying on the police to do your law enforcement, and it doesn't mean okay, go out and do like vigilante stuff. But
if you live in endorsing that here, yes.
No. I mean, like, and I don't, and I'm not even doing this like ironically. It's even over here. It's kind of dumb to in a lot of circumstances to do vigilante stuff. There are a lot of gray areas there over here, but it's not recommended. You don't want to engage in a way that's likely to kick the hornet's nest, because you know you're dealing with like inter-community relations. You're dealing with, and I mean, look, there is the occasional stuff like everyone knows some guy who's got a part of his farm where he's been burying invaders. So it does happen, but you don't want to run the risk.
That's the best pull quote. Everybody knows somebody who has a farm a part of the farm where they've been burying invaders. That was an unexpected line. Yeah, yes. So that's a pull quote for this. Yeah.
Even over here in, you know, sort of even in the sleepy little Boerland, it still happens. But it's not something you can generalize into a rule, and especially not with neighborhood watch units. And when you speak to K9 Reaper, you'll get better details on this, because he knows what's going on, and I will defer to him on all these matters because it's his area. I'm all the macro politics stuff. That's what I do. But look, if you're living in the UK or the US and stuff, you know, I mean, like there was that headline recently with police in England, police in the UK haven't solved a single burglary in 3 years in England. So, okay, you know where it's going. So the thing is, you've got to be, but you've got to organize on what you can do immediately, because the other thing is you've got to focus on two things. Well, your results have to be tangible, or people will give up, and two, you have your activities can't be so risky that you get shut down. And maintaining these things has to be something that you aim to do for the rest of your bloody life, because the decline is going to take that long before,
and it's only going to get worse. Yeah,
right. And the thing is, even if you reach a point where there's a political movement that decides, okay, we're turning the ship around, you know, big styly, or you know, lots of fireworks and exciting stuff and law and order and everything. If they consider you an inconvenience, you're going to be removed, and you have to just sort of think smart about, like, what does this actually solve a problem? If it doesn't solve a problem, what are you doing?
Yeah, because it's probably going to create 10.
You're not going to be the next Napoleon. You're not going to. There's not going to be some uprising. It's boring shit like, okay, there's a problem. The government isn't there to fix it. Let's fix it. And you have to start on that level and try and move forward on that, like that. I mean, the reason I thought about like AfriForum and like legal representation is because I was saying Oran McIntyre mentioned, he just said there's no one doing this. And I thought, wait, what? Why not? And it's true. You guys don't have any dedicated organizations where it's just...
Yeah, mountains of fucking lawyers, and not one of those motherfuckers has bothered to get off of his ass and form an organization.
There have got to be a few based lawyers floating around.
Oh, they're doubtless.
Statistically. Yeah. Right. And all you need is like a team of maybe 4 or 5 of them. They take the occasional sort of serious case on. They do a bit of grind, and they build an organization around that. And that can grow into enormous stuff. I mean, like the stuff AfriForum's doing now, from like neighborhood watches to, the thing is, that network of organizations is on the level they're building their own universities and schools and technicons, and they're preparing to replace the entire government at this stage and gradually achieving it. And it starts from simple shit like, like, remember I said they started out with a silly sort of publicity stunt going after Nestle buying milk from Grace Mugabe. So you start with something and you just keep going. And
right,
when
and you
have
pick something that you can win, because as you pointed out a bit ago, and I've made this point myself before, whatever it is that you do first, it better fucking work. It can't be like, it's like the Jack London story. I think it's to build a fire, because he's gotten in the water and he's wet and he's freezing and he has to warm himself. So he tries to build this fire and he does it stupidly beneath a bow that has all this snow. So the whole thing dumps and drops and kills his fire. He knows he's going to freeze to death, right? Your first shot out of the box, metaphorically speaking, or let's say your first move out of the gate, it has to be something that will build morale because it was successful. If it's not, you've killed it in childbirth.
Oh yeah, and it's also going to be fucking lame, okay? Like, everyone's going to sit and expect you to be like all. The thing is, everyone has this idea about like, because everyone's for some silly reason got their eye on the fascists from the flipping 20s and 30s. That society just doesn't exist anymore. Okay, yeah. The whole male population of that society had military training, combat experience, and was sitting on their thumbs and waiting for an opportunity.
Turnverein or whatever, and right. The gymnasiums and Prussian like officer standards.
Right.
Yeah, it's gone.
You had traditions and you had connections and you had a society that was not yet ready for the world that was going to be inducted into. Right? This is that world. The old world is gone. What you can do now involves none of that. You've got to stop thinking about it in any way. It doesn't help you. It doesn't help you. It paints a target in your back and it doesn't achieve anything. And at this stage, it's like, well, anything that would that sort of saves what you have left, if you can, you do it. And if it can't be saved, just say give it its last rites and move on. And there's a lot of stuff in this country that Afrikaners have had to look at and go, this is something that our ancestors put blood, sweat, and tears into. It is a ruin. We have to say goodbye now.
Triage, right?
It's painful watching it go down. It's agony. I mean, like my great uncle is head of the Postal Service. The Postal Service doesn't exist anymore. I think I may have gotten, in the last few weeks, I may have gotten one of their last packages that they're delivering. It just doesn't. It's gone. They're shutting it now.
That's coming here. Because they run their anarcho-tyranny riff. They gut everything. They wring every last drop of profitability out of it. They play, all their little toady games of pushing people into positions as that they can't handle or manage as a reward. I was talking with old friends of mine, my friend Tim, as well as my father at one point. And, back in the 1970s, everybody forgets that the United States Postal Service had 2 deliveries daily. And prior to that, you had even more, particularly, in big cities and things like that. Now they can't be relied upon to deliver anything. So we in the United States are beginning to see that shift. Once upon a time, we had a postal service that was excellent, and now it's going away. You just, it's like all the infrastructure stuff, the engineering, the bridges that fall apart, the electricity that goes out, all that is coming. I'm out in the country now, and it's crazy because in the city where I was before, I had power outages like 6 times, 7, 8 times a year. And they would run anywhere from an hour to like 6 or 10, sometimes 24 hours, but more rarely. Now I'm out in the country where tree limbs really do fall on wires all the damn time, and I've never had an outage that went more than 2 hours, and I think I've had like 2 in the course of a year. It's just it's crazy the way it's falling apart. Okay, so one thing that I definitely hear from you is, and I don't know how much time you have. I can certainly go for as much as another half hour.
Yeah, I can maybe manage 15 minutes. I think.
Yeah, and I know you have you're busy dealing with family and the rest, and it's very late where you are. So I appreciate your time. One lesson, maybe we can turn now here to briefly stated tangible lessons. Like one of them that I heard that's excellent is get your own shit together before you try to ally with others. Yep. Another one was respect and honor your existing alliances and, foster and grow them. But there's a very important one that kind of came out of this business with, well, let me first recap the other ones like we have with Afroforum, is make sure that you do something that will gain attention and absolutely not fail out of the box, because the simple act of having been successful in front of a group of greatly demoralized people has enormous galvanizing potential to drive people forward and get them excited about something. So you have to plan something that that you can win. And as you were talking about with Afroforum, it should be something that is going to get attention. You choose it for being something that you can snowball into headlines and the rest. But another one that came out with Orania that's very interesting to me is this business of planning far enough ahead. Because if I understand you correctly, the loophole, so to speak, that Orania exploited is one that no longer exists.
Yeah.
And it was simply the matter of prudence. I talk about this a lot on my channel. People say you can have it good, cheap. If you want it good, cheap, and fast, pick 2, right? Because you can have it fast and good, but it ain't going to be cheap. You can have it cheap and good, but it won't be fast, right? So when you engage in that calculus, so to speak, you have to think, if I don't have a great number of resources, what I do need absolutely like the most fundamental virtue other than humility, right? Humilitas is sort of the bedrock Christian virtue, but afterwards it's prudence
and patience.
Prudent, yes. Patience. Well, that's where you get into a difficult situation, because all these things must come together. First, you must have the prudence in order to see the goal across the horizon. Then have the patience to move towards it over time, knowing that you will eventually arrive. But so with Orania, another one that seems to come to the fore is this idea that you have to be able to see far enough ahead to move on a plane, on a chessboard, that most other people don't see. Most of them spend their time. That's why I don't like reactionary, because it's a reaction. There's not a choice about a direction. And what we do is we get distracted by things like tranny this or whatever that. And as a consequence, we don't focus. Yeah. And so what other ones would you add? Because you see them every day. You're breathing them, man, every day.
Okay, I'll tell you something we don't have that I wish we had. That I wish I had the time to do, and that is that. So the past couple of decades, you've had public libraries have been pulping books at a huge rate, and so we're losing a lot of Afrikaans literature, political writing, history books. There's a wonderful collection that I simply cannot get on my hands on. I think his name's J.J. Scorts. He did in the 1970s, he did a huge compendium of the history of Afrikaans philosophical thought, which for a tiny nation, he managed to produce 9 volumes of this thing. It really just magnificent. And what I sort of see missing is that we don't have, a sort of like rescue library. I don't even know what to call it. Like, I was thinking like Canticle for Leibowitz kind of stuff,
Right. But this is a time when you can get your hands on. They're giving it away, literally.
Yeah.
All you need is a storage facility in which to put the books with climate control.
Exactly. And the peak of that time where it would have been most productive, I think, has even passed. But it's one of those things where, you're seeing this now, where you see universities in the UK and the US doing similar stuff, and I think if someone could put together some kind of way to rescue all of these books and put them somewhere and look after them.
That sounds like an Afroforum project, because a couple thousand square feet of climate controlled space is not that hard to come up with. I mean, this is my scene, right? You can just see some of the library here, and it rolls over to
mine are still sitting in boxes because I am painfully lazy if it's not something that's just writing. I mean, I know how to build bookshelves and stuff. I'm not completely useless, but I've been meaning to get around to building them, and I just never do. But yeah, I mean, I think that I do have a contact in the movement that I can, and this is actually a guy I think might be worth. I think everyone who's listening, if they're still online, should check out. He's a guy named Koos Malan. That's Koos. Koos Malan, Malan. And he's an old. This is one of the funny things: is the leading Afrikaner intellectual and the leading organizer are both old grey men with one eye. Like Odin,
based.
right? And so Adam van Zyl did an interview. It has done a couple of interviews with Koos Malan. And Koos Malan, he's a lovely, lovely man. He's a tiny little man, but extraordinarily sharp, high energy. Recently retired jurisprudential scholar, and he wrote this fantastic book, which I am lucky enough to get for free, called "There Is No Supreme Constitution." And this is not a guy who's clued into the dissident right at all or anything. He very much lives in the world of South Africa and a little bit of like the Dutch right-wing political circle. But he wrote this book where, like, I read it and it's like, it's a way more eloquent and incisive sort of version of all of the lessons that you get from a lot of the dissident rights, plus a lot of much more practical sort of approaches to this. And sort of, and when he sort of like, one of the wonderful things he came up with that was a very concise way of talking about a criticism of liberal constitutionalism, as he said, division of powers, it's not really real. You've got a ruling class, they've got shared values, and the separation of powers is just a whole series of rubber stamps on a common opinion. And so the separation of powers isn't a separation of powers, it's a multiplication of legitimating sort of rubber stamps. And I mean, it's not, most of us are already sort of absorbed those lessons, but I think it's one of those nice things where you get to see it approached from our perspective. And for anyone who's still on the fence about how one ought to be thinking about powers that be, I think it's a really good one, because even in our circles, we still get people who are going like, okay, well, they're very attached to the Constitution, it's a sacred document, or you get people who think, you've got to preserve the state as it is, and it's sort of like his approach is going, no, forget all of that. You've got a community of common values, and that's the only thing that's real, and you move from there and consolidate your powers how you can, and you defend what you can, and you move on. And I think this is one of the things that you're left with when you don't have a state that represents you. You are a stateless people like we are. And nobody's coming to save us. No one's going to sort our shit out for us. And hoping that some legal institution will take your side for anything other than a temporary way is, I don't think it's accurate. And one of the weird things, I think the big lesson, and this is one that Afrikaner representatives talk about a lot, they'll say Afrikaners being dependent on the state made them weak, because they had this big thing that was always there for them, made sure that they were always employed, had a good, sort of labor market waiting for them. They had good education, they had good security, and all this. And when it was gone, where were they? I mean, sort of out in the wilderness. And okay, luckily for us, things were not actually that bad for the first decade of the new South Africa. We had a market boom as foreign direct investment came in. The labor market just went, everything was great. It was a hard time for a lot of white people who got cut from the civil service. But a lot of people started their own businesses, and because we all most people went into small businesses and so on, actually did kind of well, got wealthier on average for a while. But it all comes apart, and you can't trust the state. It's not good for you. It's like that old thing from like Ibn Khaldun. He says the point of human life is to achieve settled community with material comforts and everything. And once it's achieved that, it begins to turn to corruption and weakness and falls apart. And
right. So it's like even Spenglerian cycles, or you can talk about atrophy, and so there's actually this might be a good place to wrap this, because, you talked about the long decline, right? That we need to get this idea out of our heads that there's going to be a sudden, denouement, and we're going to have a dramatic climax of all of this. It's a long, grinding, anarcho-tyrannical, depressing decline that involves going out with an extended whimper that's more like a sad trombone or a fart sound, right? Rather than some great, crash of drama. However, that very slow decline, as you're talking about with Afrikaners having a sort of period in which they could acclimatize to the new circumstances as things fell apart, that gives you some time to get your legs under you. And I guess that
we were lucky.
And it brings me around to a sort of a closing view here, which is that, and my buddy Tim told me this ages ago, Moses went and wandered in the desert for 40 years, specifically because that's how long it took to raise 2 generations with a new view and to inculcate these new views. When they came back to encountering anyone else, they were firm in their convictions because they had 2 solid generations to rewrite the cultural program, so to speak. And so maybe a long anarcho-tyrannical decline is what we need in order to get 2 generations raised who are, fit to hunt grizzly bear with a switch, a proper group of them ready to kick ass and take names. Well, we have about a minute left here. If I'm going to get out under 2 hours and let you get away, that'll also save me having to download and re-upload this. But please follow Mr. Daigen. You can see links for him in the description below. I posted his Substack link in the chat. I will post that as soon as we get off the stream down into the description so people can find it. I recommend you all go and follow him. You have 15, 20 seconds, Mr. Daigen. Anything you want to say in closing?
I'd say the first step is to psychologically disengage from the political system that you've thought of as your own, and sort of think of it as an alien thing that hangs over your head. And the only real things are the people that you build relationships with in real life. And when you start from there, then, things grow from that. But if you're still trying to hang your hat on the abstractions that you were taught in civics class, then you end up like I was, a white student trying to help a bunch of black genocidaires. It doesn't help you. Focus on real shit. Forget the nation and the constitution and the flag and all that nonsense.
All right,
you've got real people in front of you.
Well, then I thank you very much, sir. Thank you all for joining us. And until next time, I am Semi-Gog, and I am out.